Okay, I want to show you guys today what we're doing next week. So next week we're aerifying. The temperatures coming up to the next week haven't been exactly as warm as we would like, especially going into aerification. Last weekend is when we really start to green up, and you could see how a little bit of moisture and when the soil temperatures rise a little bit, you could see how green we get that quick. For you homeowners, what that is because we do the dormant fertilizer. So we actually fertilize in around December when the grass is dormant, and then you get a quick green up in the spring, just like this. So that's our fertilizer kicking in from our dormant fertilizing. So because of the temperatures and so when we aerify, what we're trying to do is control a thatch layer. So I'll explain that a little bit. Here's a plug. Right now this plug, that's all our roots. We don't have a huge amount of roots right now. They're pushing out though. I could see them in there. So what you're trying to control is a thatch layer. And a thatch layer is dead roots that die throughout the year and collect here. And they create a sponge-like area, which is called thatch. And usually that's in the first couple inches of the soil profile. You want to try to maintain your thatch layer on greens to, no more than a half an inch. If you have a half an inch of thatch, you're starting to run into problems. But I've seen greens before that have an inch to 2 inch of thatch. And you can tell as golfers, even when you're playing on a green that's spongy, that's not necessarily good. That's a heavy thatched green. So you'll get bigger ball marks. You can't get the greens as firm. Water won't penetrate through them, and they also don't take up nutrients as much if you have a huge thatch layer, because all the nutrients are collected in that thatch layer and the roots don't need to push through. So you can see why it's important to aerify. Here's a good example. So this is an aerification hole, and we get that sand in there, which dilutes the thatch layer. So you can see there's no thatch at all where the sand is. Here there's a little bit, but it's nothing that I'm worried about, and you could catch up with. So that being said, because of the temperatures, and next week we have 2 days that there's a frost, so that's going to shut the grass down a lot. Plus the other thing that, it's harder to explain, I've tried to explain it last year a little bit, but we put out a heavy growth regulator this time of year because we're trying to control the seed head of the Poa annua. So Poa annua seeds in the spring, and if you don't control that seed head, you're going to have bumpy greens. That's why you'll see some greens that would look white, and I always talk about the seed head. So if the Poa is producing too much energy to produce that seed head, then you're behind the game for the season. So last year and it's really difficult to get the control of the seed head. Your timing weather-wise has to be almost perfect. We're out spraying today because I saw some seed head pop up. I think last year we were off a little bit. We had some seed head on a couple of the greens, and those were the ones that the Poa last year when I was showing you sunk in. I think that they produced too much energy to produce that seed head, and they were weaker throughout the hot summer. Again, we didn't have problems last year, but it was just something I noticed throughout the season. That's the technical aspect that obviously golfers want to understand or really be that interested in, but I guess it's a good example of showing how much more goes into this than just mowing grass. So where we're at now is I decided that, again, last year we went with the smaller hole in the spring, and it worked out pretty good for us. I don't want to get into a routine with that, but because of the weather, I'm going to go this year again with a smaller hole. I would like to see more golf this time of year already, and I have a feeling that after next week we're going to get warmer temperatures, and I don't want the greens to be behind as far as healing that far when we're already into April. So I'm going to try this again, and it's more for the golf aspect of it, which we try to do both. We try to provide perfect conditions, and sometimes you have to rip up the grass to get perfect conditions, but we also understand the golf aspect. So I just want to give you an example. So this is the bigger hole that we normally do, in the spring, and I'm gonna do this in the fall. And if it were normal spring, I would go with this hole at a 2-inch spacing. This right now is an 1.5 inch spacing on the machine that we use. And technically, if I went at a 2-inch spacing with that size hole, I would pull out just as much material with this smaller hole at 1.5 inch spacing. So that's my theory behind it, and that's what we're trying to do. So with this smaller hole though, you could see that the greens would heal a lot quicker. One thing I'm concerned about next week is the rain that we have this weekend. If I'm going to use this smaller hole, I want it to be as dry as possible so we can pull a plug. When it's wet, your chances of pulling a clean hole with the smaller hole are less likely. So if Monday comes along and it's not as dry as I'd like, then I'm not going to start the aerification till Tuesday. One good thing about the aerification with the smaller hole is it will be a quicker process, and it also will be a quicker heal time, which is what I'm looking for this time of year right now, because like I said, next week the grass is going to shut down, and I don't want to have a larger hole when the grass shuts down, because it will take 4 or 5 weeks to heal. With the smaller hole at a tighter spacing, hopefully I'm still pulling as much material out, and it will heal quicker. The other thing I want to show you too is after they heal, just to make sure that I'm pulling out enough material, because again, that's what we want to dilute that thatch layer. I'm going to come back, and right here you can see there's little holes here. This was a even smaller tine that pulled holes out. You could barely see it. That's not going to be disruptive at all, but that's a little extra that I'm going to do in about 3 weeks. So I'm confident that we get the material out that we need to, the thatch. I know that's really technical, but I do want to explain the process, and hopefully it's not as disruptive this year, and because I know that everybody's itching to come out and play. The weather just hasn't been great, and hopefully it goes well. Again, I don't want to get into, in the spring or in the fall, we'll go back to our big holes. I don't want to get into the small hole all of the time if we start getting a thatch layer, but we're not right now, so I could go with it, and hopefully it works out. Thanks.